Hi guys, it's Miss Faith here, and today we're going to be reading Puss in Boots by Charles Perrault. Now, what can you tell about the cat on the cover of this book? That's right, he's wearing clothes. He's got a hat and a shirt. I think that makes this cat a really special cat. So let's read and figure out if he is. Here's the picture. A miller had 3 sons, and when he died, he left them nothing but his mill, his donkey, and his cat. The sons didn't send for a lawyer because they knew their whole legacy would have gone for fees. But it didn't take them long to decide who should get what. The eldest got the mill, the second got the donkey, and nothing was left for the youngest but the cat. He wasn't very happy about it. "My brothers will be able to work together and make a decent living," he said. "But once I've eaten my cat and made a muff out of the fur, I'm sure to starve." So here in the picture you can see here's the youngest and the cat, and then over here is the donkey, the mill, and the 2 older brothers. Do you think the youngest brother is going to overcome this obstacle of not having anything? How so? Very good. I think he will too. I feel like this cat is going to be really special. Let's read on to find out. The cat, who had been listening while pretending not to, said with a serious, sympathetic look, "Don't worry, master. Just get me a sack and a pair of boots to carry me through the brambles, and you'll see that you haven't come out as badly as you think." Now, what do you think brambles means? That's a tricky word, isn't it? Brambles is like a thick vine, kind of like weeds. I can see why he needs boots to get through it because those will hurt. You can kind of see them over here in this picture. The cat's master was not exactly convinced, but then he remembered that he had seen the cat do some very clever things, such as catching rats and mice by hanging by his paws or hiding in the flour and playing dead. So he said to himself, "Oh well, why not give it a try?" When Puss had got what he asked for, he pulled on his fine boots, threw the sack over his shoulder, and holding the strings between his forepaws, went out to a warren where there were lots of rabbits. So here in the picture you can see Puss is putting on his boots, just like the title. He put bran and sow thistle in the sack and waited for some young rabbit who hadn't caught on to the ruses of this world to poke his nose into the sack. No sooner had he settled himself than a harebrained young rabbit walked right in. Puss pulled the strings tight and killed the rabbit without mercy or compassion. Now in this story, there's some personification. Can you give me some examples of personification? Very good. When the cat, Puss, is doing things like a human, that's personification. So him talking, putting on the boots, walking, all of that are examples of personification. So let's keep reading. Proud of his kill, he went straight to the royal palace and asked to see the king. They showed him into his majesty's apartments, where he bowed low and said, "Sire, I've brought you a wild rabbit, the Marquis of Cabras," that was the name Puss had decided to give his master, "has bidden me offer you with his compliments." "Tell your master," said the king, "that his gift has given me great pleasure, and I thank him kindly." The next time Puss went out with his sack, he hid in a wheat field. When 2 partridges walked into the sack, he pulled the strings and caught them both. The king accepted 2 partridges gladly and told his servants to reward the cat for his pains. For 2 or 3 months, Puss went on bringing the king game from his master's preserve. Now, game, that is another vocabulary word. What do you think game means based on the context clues of the story? Good job! Game is the wild animal's flesh and meat. So in this part of the story, he's not playing games like a game of baseball or checkers with the king. He's giving him these animals. Now, why do you think Puss is giving the king all of these animals? That's a good answer. I think that Puss is giving the king these animals so that the king will pay him and his master will give him money. Do you think that Puss is going to keep bringing the king the game after the 3 months mentioned, or stop? All right, we're going to have to read on to see. Then, one day, when he knew the king would be going for a ride along the river with his daughter, who was the most beautiful princess in the whole world, Puss said to his master, "Do as I say, and your fortune is made. Just go for a swim in the river. I'll show you the exact spot and leave the rest to me." The Marquis of Carabas followed Puss's instructions to the letter, though he couldn't imagine what good it would do him. While he was swimming, the king passed by, and Puss shouted with all his might, "Help! Help! The Marquis of Carabas is drowning!" Look at him. There he is shouting. And here, back here on the bridge, that's the king. And here's his master's feet right here. What do you think Puss is trying to do with these plans? That's a good answer. I think that Puss is probably trying to get the king to notice his master because he's been talking about him for months. What do you think is going to happen next? Awesome. Well, we're just going to have to read and find out. Hearing the shouts, the king stuck his head out of the carriage door and recognized the cat who had brought him to much game. "Hurry!" he called out to his guards. "Hurry to the rescue of the Marquis of Carabas." And here he is, floating in the river, and there, the king, he can see him in the river, and he's trying to help. While the poor Marquis was being pulled out of the river, Puss went over to the carriage and spoke to the king. "While my master was swimming," he said, "some thieves came up and made off with his clothes, even though I yelled, 'Stop, thief!' at the top of my voice. The rascal had hid them under a stone." That Puss, he just hid the clothes so that he could tell the king that his clothes were stolen. Oh my. The king ordered the officers of the wardrobe to fetch one of his finest suits for the Marquis of Carabas. Once the Marquis had changed, the king made great fuss over him. And since the fine clothes brought out his good looks, the king's daughter took a liking to him too. The Marquis gave her 2 or 3 tender glances, and before you knew it, she had fallen in love with him. The king proposed that he join them in the carriage for a drive. So here's the Marquis in all his fancy clothes over here. And here's the king and the princess. And if you look real closely, the princess looks like she's fallen in love. Now, before we read this next page, I'm going to show you the picture. Based off of this picture, what do you think is going to happen next? That's a good answer. I think that Puss is trying to tell these farmers here to bow to the king when he goes by, because it's respect, it's the king. Well, let's read and find out. Delighted that his plan was turning out so well, Puss went on ahead. When he saw some peasants mowing a meadow, he said to them, "Friends, I want you to tell the king that this meadow belongs to the Marquis of Carabas. If you don't, you will be cut up as small as sausage meat." What? That's not what I predicted. When the king came along, he asked the mowers who owned the meadow they were mowing. Puss's threat had scared them out of their wits, and they answered in unison, "The Marquis of Carabas owns it." "A fine meadow you've got there," said the king to the Marquis. "Yes, indeed, sire," said the Marquis. "Year in, year out, it yields a goodly crop." Puss, who was still going on ahead, saw some harvesters and said to them, "I want you to say that all this wheat belongs to the Marquis of Carabas. If you don't, you will be cut up into sausage meat." The king, who came along for a few moments later, wanted to know who owned all of the wheat he was looking at. "The Marquis of Carabas," said the harvesters, and again the king was well pleased with the Marquis. Puss, who was going on ahead of the carriage, kept saying the same thing to all the people he met, and the king marveled at the size of the Marquis's estates. So here you can see that the king is talking to the people from the page before, and here Puss is talking to all the harvesters. At last, Puss came to a beautiful castle that belonged to an ogre. He was the richest ogre in the world, for all the lands the king had passed through belonged to him. Puss, who had been careful to find out all about this ogre, went into the castle and asked leave to call on him. "What a pity it would be," he said, "to be so near his castle and not stop and pay my respects." The ogre welcomed him as affably as an ogre can, and bade him to be seated. Affably. Well, that's a weird word. Here's another vocab word. What do you think affably is by the context clues? Good job. Affably means friendly. Friendly and affably are synonyms. What's another synonym for affably, do you think? Very good. Let's keep reading. "I've been told," said Puss, "that you can turn yourself into any animal you please, a lion, for instance, or even an elephant." "That is true," said the ogre, "and to prove it, I'll turn myself into a lion." So here you can see that Puss is talking to the ogre. Puss was so terrified at seeing a lion right there in the room that he had scrambled up onto the roof, which wasn't easy because boots are no good for walking on tiles, and it was dangerous besides. A little later, when Puss saw that the ogre was an ogre again, he came down and admitted that the lion had given a bad scare. Do you think that Puss wanted him to turn into the lion? And why so? That's a good guess. I think that Puss wanted him to turn into a lion, so he made sure that it was true with what he had heard. So let's keep reading. So here the ogre and Puss are talking to each other again, so obviously he's not a lion anymore. When he'd caught his breath, Puss said, "I hear you can turn yourself into small animals too, a rat or a mouse, for instance. That seems impossible." "It seems impossible, does it?" said the ogre. A second later, the ogre was gone, and a mouse was scurrying across the floor. Puss pounced and caught him and gobbled him all up. Look at that. There's Puss, and there's the ogre as a mouse. Just then, the king came to the beautiful castle, and of course he wanted to go in. When Puss heard the sound of the carriage rumbling over the drawbridge, he ran out to meet the king. "Welcome, your majesty," he said, "to the Marquis of Carabas' castle." "My dear Marquis," cried the king, "is it possible that this castle is yours too? What could be more beautiful than this courtyard and all these buildings around it? Let's have a look inside." The Marquis gave the young princess his hand, and the king led the way, and they all went in. In the great hall, they found a banquet that the ogre had ordered for his friends. These friends had just arrived, but when they saw the king's carriage, they ran away. The king was charmed by the Marquis's manners and estates, and the king's daughter had favored him from the first. So, after 5 or 6 beakers of wine, the king said to him, "You have only to say the word, my dear Marquis, and I'll take you for my son-in-law." The Marquis said the word with a low, elaborate bow, and married the princess the same day. So here's the picture of the castle, and obviously down here are the king, the Marquis, the princess, and Puss. And over here is the Marquis bowing and taking the hand of the princess. So this page doesn't have any words. So can you tell me some things that you see going on in here? That's right, there's a big dinner party going on, and Puss is sleeping. Now what do you think this big dinner party might be? I think it might be their wedding too. Puss became a great lord and gave up chasing mice, except just once in a while for the fun of it. The end. That was a good book, wasn't it? So did you think that this was Puss's plan all along? I think so too. Did Puss get anything out of this, or was it all for his master? That is a good answer. Puss gets to live with him, and he lives in this big castle now. Very good. I hope you enjoyed the book, and I'll see you next time.